Hello and welcome to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, is our most ambitious project yet. Our plan is to look at the state of the comic book industry during a particular year, and then to examine in detail the major ways that Marvel Comics in particular evolved during that year. We'll look at who was creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics either debuted or ended. After that, we'll get down to business, take out our stack of Daredevil comics, and look at what our old friend, the Man Without Fear, was up to during that same time. We're glad you've joined us. We are back with part 2 of 2003. My name is Dwayne. With me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, tonight's going to be fun, I think.
Yeah, we are well along in the second edition of Daredevil, and I'm excited to see the stuff that you want to talk about tonight.
We teased it last week. We had a really big thing happen last year. Matt Murdock's secret gets revealed, so the world now knows Matt Murdock and Daredevil are one and the same, even though he categorically denied it in a press conference. And this year, we arguably, I think, have something that tops that as far as a really big moment in Daredevil.
Okay.
Which seems absolutely crazy to me that you could say, yeah, his secret is out, but then we did something to top that.
There's actually it's a crazy enough thing that there are a few things here that could be, although I know what's the thing I think is the thing that tops it. So I'm going to see what the actual event you're referring to is.
Right, then I guess without further ado, we should start getting into talking about the year for Daredevil. The year in Daredevil.
All right, Dwayne. So we have spent a lot of time talking Daredevil, and I think that as we move into now the late 40s and into the 50s, you probably would agree with me that these are some of the most impressive Daredevil stories that we've read. So this is Brian Michael Bendis at sort of his peak in terms of, if you love Bendis, this is the kind of stuff you love. If you hate Bendis, this is the kind of stuff you hate, right?
I don't know how anybody can hate this. To be perfectly frank, I liked Brian Michael Bendis with the little bit that we had read about him of his before, but like he's now elevated in my mind as far as comic book writers goes, having read what we've read so far, and he goes on for a little bit longer here too.
So I would agree with you. But again, if you're looking for knockdown, drag out action and not so much like navel gazing,
yeah, I guess that's true.
This is very different from any Daredevil we would have seen for the last 30 years, you know? And so, yeah, they're fantastic. They're really interesting. Maleev, I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of what you're thinking about him as he's really coming into his own on the art here. It's a pretty impressive run. But you got a bunch of other Daredevil appearances to talk about, some reprints and the like, and then go through and take a look at kind of what's all going on. What was Daredevil up to this year?
All right, so let's start with the appearances. The main Daredevil run for 2003 is going to be issues 39 through 53. There was also, it looks like a one-shot, Daredevil The Target, #1. I couldn't really find anything much about that. We talked about it last week, Ultimate Daredevil and Electra. I actually, in looking at the like synopsises of these that you gave me, I thought these were reprints, but yeah, it sounded like they weren't actually reprints. They may have been an actual just limited series.
Which one?
Daredevil, Ultimate Daredevil and Electra.
Ultimate Daredevil and Electra is Ultimate Universe versions of Daredevil and Electra.
Yes.
So it's,
So
and I understand why you'd say that, because like Essential Daredevil is a reprint series where they reprint them in the big black and white volumes. Ultimate Daredevil and Electra is actually the Ultimate Universe versions of them, which are very different.
it's just weird because like I said, I read the synopsis is the like one sentence, this is what this is about. And it sounded like something we had already read. So that's why I thought they were reprints originally.
Well, and that makes sense because essentially it is kind of an alternate universe retelling of how Electra and Daredevil meet.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there was a Daredevil the movie comic as well, to sort of tying in, I would suppose. We have Paradise X. He was in issues 7 through 11, as well as the issue X. Exiles in issues 20 and 25. He was in Alias, issues 18 and 24. Marvel Universe, The End, issues 1 through 6. Ultimate X-Men number 36. Captain America number 19. And then at the end of the year, he was in Punisher issues 33 and 34. So now, as far as the main Daredevil run, we had two writers this year. We had Brian Michael Bendis, who started off the year and did all the way through issue 50. And then David Mack returns and picks up with 51, 52, and 53. And actually, that story bleeds into 2004. So we're going to wait and talk about that story until a couple of weeks from now when we get to 2004. As far as pencils,
I was going to say ahead. before you go too far into a lot of this, the other thing just to keep in mind is that Ultimate Daredevil and Electra is not in the main continuity. So this is not the same Matt Murdock we've been talking about. Daredevil the movie is not in the same continuity. So this is not the Daredevil we've been talking about. Any of the X books like Paradise X and the other one are not in regular Marvel continuity. That's in that Earth X universe. And Marvel Universe The End, which is a miniseries that came out this year, also is not actually in Marvel continuity. It's just something Jim Starlin wrote that kind of exists kind of off on its own. And no less an authority than Tom Brevoort himself has essentially stated that it does not exist in Marvel continuity, essentially doesn't fit there. It's just off on its own. So
there's a lot of appearances that aren't really considered, 616 main continuity story this year that he appeared in.
I would say most of the things you referenced here are things that are outside continuity, and a lot of the other ones, like the Alias books and things like that, would be sort of crossovers where it's Jessica Jones coming in to check on him and stuff like that because she's his bodyguard. So some sort of minor crossover type things. So it was not as much of a year of him running all over the place, running away to do things while his identity is under siege, as it seems when you look at the list.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So getting back to the artists on these books this year, Manuel Gutierrez did issue 39, both pencils and inks. Terry Dodson did issue 40 on pencils, and Rachel Dodson did the inks. Then we have Alex Maleev coming in doing issues 41 to 50, and then David Mack 51 to 53, the issues that he wrote. So pretty succinct small group of creators that worked on these books. And sometimes when there gets to be a lot of creators, it can start to be a bit chaotic. We didn't have that, and so I think the story shows, because we had a really, really good story this year. It's actually several stories, and if we're looking at it, the year begins with the named story that started at the end of 2002. It's called The Trial of the Century. But this isn't the trial that we've had story leading up to. The one with Matt Murdock going up against the Daily Globe for the defamation because they leaked his secret. Instead, this is Luke Cage urging and eventually convincing Matt Murdock to defend Hector Ayala, aka the White Tiger, who recently got back into the costume and in a failed attempt to stop a robbery gets arrested for a police officer who was shot and killed. He got in there, uh, wasn't able to stop the robbery, and in the process of not being able to stop the robbery, a police officer gets shot and killed. They run off, and the police catch the White Tiger there holding a TV, standing next to the body of the police officer, and immediately assumed that he did it.
Yep.
Not a great predicament to be in. And as I mentioned, Luke Cage wants him to do this, and Matt Murdock's very hesitant to do so. He understands what's going on with his secret being out and what it could look like, and this is very high profile. The media's all over this, and
Yep.
you know, if he's got any chance of having his secret thing kind of blow over, taking on a high profile case of a superhero probably isn't going to help that matter any.
Doesn't help him at all.
So, but eventually he relents. He talks to Hector Ayala in prison. He says he didn't do it. Matt Murdock obviously can tell he didn't do it. He can hear his heartbeat, all that sort of thing. So they end up going to trial. The trial doesn't go particularly well, despite the fact Ayala is innocent. Murdock's defense includes calling superheroes like Reed Richards, Luke Cage, and Jessica Jones before Ayala himself ends up taking the stand. During cross-examination, though, Ayala loses his cool and lashes out in anger and frustration about how no one understands superheroes and what he's going through.
Yeah, it's not a good look, to be quite frank. He really doesn't help himself or the base thesis that some of these guys are a little bit crazy and maybe shouldn't be out in their long underwear doing this stuff. But
No.
nonetheless, it was completely something that should not have happened. And it's weird because Murdock's a pretty decent lawyer. His client's actually innocent, and yet somehow he manages to lose it. Primarily, according to when we look at the book, it's just that people are so fed up with superheroes and what they're doing that essentially they're biased against him, and they just want to put him away.
The circumstantial evidence suddenly looks a lot less circumstantial and a lot more credible in this instance. And then when you've got a defendant who gets angry and sort of loses his cool on the stand, it doesn't help matters any.
Correct.
So this story comes to a tragic ending with Hector Ayala convicted of murder. Dismayed over the conviction and assurances by Murdock that he would get to go free, Hector attempts to flee the courthouse rather than being taken into custody and is gunned down by police on the stairs of the courthouse. Actually, just gut-wrenching when you're reading these pages and some of the last few panels of this. And you see Murdock standing on the steps, you see the body, you see all these police officer cars and people out in front of the courthouse. It would just, I felt really bad. Like you could tell that it was coming and you're just like, oh God. And if he starts trying to get away, this is inevitably what's going to end up happening, but it no less is sort of a gut punch when you see it play out on the page.
Yeah, it was really difficult. And it's one of those things where not only does Daredevil, or Matt Murdock sort of fail him, but in the case of failing him, then he sort of becomes almost like another casualty of one of Daredevil's wars as well, So it's all kind of something that mixes together to just wrong time, wrong place repeatedly for Ayala in these stories.
And as you mentioned, this ends up then leading to eventually Agent Delgado getting the White Tiger crystal in the future, like we talked about last week.
Mm-hmm.
So, starting in March, we get another storyline called Lowlife, in which the Owl has taken over part of Kingpin's old territory when, Vanessa came in, sold off all the territories and the businesses and all that sort of stuff. And the Owl is starting to sell a drug called MGH, or mutant growth hormone. He's also trying to get incriminating evidence on Matt Murdock / Daredevil. Also in this story, we meet Mila Donovan, a blind woman Daredevil saves from getting hit by a truck, who ends up falling for the hero and befriends Matt Murdock since he's Daredevil, according to the newspapers. This was a really interesting story because I did not expect to see the Owl again. And he comes back, and like, this mutant growth hormone is basically just like blood and skin cells from him, and he is like selling it on the street and that, and people are buying it because it's giving them this like high, and it's sort of like transforming their genetic code for a little bit, and they get like temporary superpowers and things like this. It's really, really interesting, this whole thing.
Yeah, and the weird thing is too that we're talking 2002 or 2003. This is right about the time where a lot of the steroid scandals in baseball and all this other stuff is happening.
Yeah.
So I think that really when we talk about, mutant growth hormone, it's human growth hormone is the thing that was essentially being used by a lot of the baseball players and things like this just a couple of years earlier that we'd been getting all the bans on and everything else. So this is all kind of riffing off sort of that, that not only can it help you hit a few more home runs or throw a little faster, but potentially it could turn you into an insane avian supervillain or something like this. So,
something
and,
like
and
that.
that
Yeah.
and that is interesting because this Owl is also very different because since he has mutated now, he looks much more inhuman. Like the old
Yes.
Owl was just kind of a guy who put on this exoskeleton and he looked a little weird. He had like
The hair made him look weird, and yeah.
And he had like Coke glass kind of glasses and stuff. But now this Owl is just an actual like universal monster type of guy.
Wow. So as part of that story, Yuri Rosenthal, the Globe newspaper owner whom Matt Murdock is suing, is found dead in his home, and Matt Murdock is taken into custody for questioning during his date with Mila. Matt tries to apologize to Mila for the interrupted date, takes down the Owl as Daredevil, and learns that the Kingpin is back in town. So lots going on across these few issues.
Yep. Big night for Daredevil, as Mila actually kind of notes. She's like, hold it. After he got done with me, he then did all of this other stuff. Like, we go out on a date, or was that another night? Maybe that's another night where he has an even bigger one, because I can't even remember. But yeah,
it may have been. I don't recall. Suffice to say, it was there. He does a lot in an evening, whether he's with Karen or now with Mila. He's good at doing lots of things in one.
He's a busy man.
Busy man, yes. So from there, this then leads directly into a story called Hardcore and the Return of Typhoid Mary. Kingpin is amassing power again and needs a distraction for Matt Murdock / Daredevil, so he pulls Mary from her normal life as a soap opera star. Her distraction, it turns out, is showing up during Mila and Matt's walk to lunch and setting Matt on fire. Jessica Jones and Luke Cage help Matt subdue Mary while keeping Mila safe. With Mary in jail, Bullseye talks to Kingpin about giving him another shot at Daredevil, which turns out to be a shot at Mila. Daredevil saves her and carves a crosshair tattoo into Bullseye's forehead, and angrily turns his sights on Kingpin. Yeah, this was, for all the talk about lots of character development across some of the Bendis books. This storyline I felt like had a lot of action in it. There was a lot of punching, a lot of like fire and like, people running and screaming and that sort of thing. And yeah, there was a lot going on across this hardcore storyline.
Yep. Although it is still interesting. There was 80% of the pages are just people sitting around talking. And in many cases, it's just one panel sort of superimposed onto the next one with maybe a little bit of a cropping or something like that. So I think you can overstate the amount of action. You've been trained by Bendis the last couple of years to be not expecting a lot, but really, and even most of the fights up until we get to number 50, it's usually basically like 2 or 3 panels. Somebody beats the living tar out of somebody and it's done. It's not like the Gene Colan 8-page
No, I mean
it's
not like an 8-page fight scene, but I think you're overstating how little it is. I think some of this stuff was like the Bullseye fight. I think was about 4 to 6 pages, and like the thing with Typhoid Mary was probably 6 to 8 pages, but it was split across 2 books because she basically shows up and starts him on fire, and then we end the book, and then the next book you get all this sort of lead up to how she got involved, and then kind of the last 4 to 6 pages is that current fight again. We get back to current times, and we learn the outcome of the fight. So it's less than we've seen at other times with other writers and other artists, but it's more than we've seen, I think, in a lot of cases across the Bendis run.
100%. There was more in action. And the other thing was I correct that they again had another situation where 2 books ended with the exact same scene? Just like a year or so ago, we had 2 books that ended with someone holding a gun to Daredevil's head on a street corner. We had 2 books that ended with him being set on fire by Typhoid Mary.
That sounds right. Yes.
Both of them, he's like, what can I do for you? He's like, you can catch fire or whatever. And then
Yeah.
the next book starts completely somewhere else, like 2 days in the past. And the end of the next book is also that exact same thing with him.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then we actually see the resolution of that fight the following book. But yes,
Yep.
I mean, they did need to tell us how Typhoid Mary had come to be part of this whole thing and what her purpose was and all this. And I feel bad for her because she was back to being like a normal human being. Like she's like in therapy and she's taking medication and all this sort of thing. And so she's got everything under control and like she's living life like anybody else. And then Kingpin shows up and he's like, I know what you're going through, but I know the person inside of you wants to get out. And all I have to do is say a few things and maybe deprive you of a little bit of medication. And suddenly we get Typhoid Mary again.
Yeah. And I think this is a difficult one in some ways because I think I look at this also differently after spending years on the Moon Knight podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
Because essentially what Typhoid Mary has is DID, right? And they're still calling it multiple personality disorder here and everything else. It's kind of from 20 years ago when the terminologies were all different than that. But, if you think about the fact that a lot of times we would end up talking about there's that danger of the idea that you've got the somehow evil personality. Typhoid Mary checks that box. The very idea that you've got sort of a person locked inside who you then hypnotized to somehow just take care of them permanently so that they never get a
Yeah.
chance to come out of the box. I think there's a lot of deeply problematic things about this to me now that I wouldn't have thought about before we had spent as much time talking about DID and as we had over the last few years, or listening to some of the DID discussions they had, like on the Into the Night Moon Knight podcast and things like that.
Oh,
So
that's true.
that I found interesting. So really, there are some things to break down there in terms of that, but Bendis doesn't bother with that. He's not really analyzing that part of it. He's just sort of, Kingpin breaks her out, but also brings back that idea that he was essentially she was kind of having an affair with him too. And at that
Yeah.
point, he had the wife and son, and he's like, "Why are my wife and son angry at me and betraying me? Oh, oh,
Yeah.
assassin who I've been sleeping with and now coming to help me kill everyone again." You know, um, he he also needs to look in the mirror a little bit and see maybe why this happened, as someone said at some point. But yeah, it's interesting. I do think that also watching like Severance recently with that whole idea of like the innies and stuff like that, you start getting that idea
Uh-huh.
of how scary it would be if you're stuck forever inside. Now, mind you, it doesn't mean it's good for people when Typhoid Mary comes out, because she is a dangerous, messed up person. But
Yes.
but there's some interesting things going on there.
So at the end of issue 49, he Matt Murdock seems to have snapped. Like he is really angry, and to the point where
Correct.
he literally carves a crosshair tattoo into Bullseye's forehead. And he's like, "You come after me multiple times. You've hurt the people I care about. You've now tried to go after my latest love interest." There's something about I'm reading this and I'm like, this feels like this is going to be different when Kingpin and Daredevil meet this time. There's just
Mm-hmm.
he seems way more angry and way more upset than I think we've ever seen him to
Yep.
this point. And I mean, he's had love interests die. He's had, Foggy has come within inches of death several times as well. And like he's had his life taken away from him. All these things have happened, and he's never to me felt quite as mad as he felt at the end of issue 49. And what this
Yep.
culminates in is an epic showdown with the Kingpin in issue 50 that is going to be our spotlight for this week, because I mean, come on, there's no way that I I could pick anything else but this issue as being our spotlight for this week. But it is interesting. I just wanted to make sure that I call this out as we kind of set the stage for what the spotlight looks like, because I think that that's an important note to think about when we start going through the spotlight issue. And I was just curious if that was the impression that you got, Dan, when you were reading these books.
I think Murdoch's just been going through some tough times, first off, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
of stress. But yes, that essentially he's trying to get things in order. When it comes down to it, it's all still the Kingpin's fault that his identity's out there. It's the Kingpin's fault that he got burned by his ex enemy. It's
Yes.
the Kingpin's fault that now this guy's after him, and he's just had it. But I mean, the other thing is he thought he was kind of, rid of Bullseye and the like. And the guy keeps coming back, and not only coming back, coming into his house to now, almost make it seem like he's going to have a cottage industry of killing his girlfriends, essentially at this point. Like
Yeah.
you'll never it because the other two were sort of killed in the line of business, if you will, right? That he killed Electra because she was fighting him and the like. And he killed Karen because she actually got essentially threw herself in the path of the Billy Club So this is the first one that really, I think, feels personal in terms of he's not just
It's not
killing
targeting
people who
him.
get in his
He's
way.
yeah. This is
He's going out and, the job is that Kingpin's given him is to kill Daredevil. But he's like, this is what's really going to make me happy. And so Bullseye's just an awful, awful, not even human being, right? And Daredevil's had it. So he's got a little bit of the old Moon Knight in him, and that's never good for anybody. And in fact, this
no.
is really about the same time, just a little bit after this, is when we get the really dark Moon Knight stories where he's going around carving his
Oh
moons
yeah,
into
that's
people's forehead.
right. That's
So
right.
the mid to late 2000s, I think partly because of the whole 9/11 thing and a lot of this, America becomes a place where there's a lot more dark sort of storytelling. And it's interesting because we kind of go from this point where we have cynical sorts of heroes, to ones where we really get people who are dark, and that's going to be the takeaway for today. But I think looking at this is a perfect example of kind of what I'm talking about there, or will be talking about in the
Yeah.
takeaway. I don't even know if he's really so angry as he's just fed up and determined, where he's like, I don't know if you've really been listening to me this last 30 some years when I tell you I don't want you doing this anymore. You know?
Sure.
And with both Bullseye and Kingpin, he's he's got a more resolute way of going about it. But he doesn't kill him. It's another one of those, is he a good guy's? This, I think, is a part of this that goes a long way towards answering that this year, because he would be well within his rights to have just taken the big rock and stabbed it right into his skull with what the guy just attempted to do and what he's done it before. And he
Yeah.
did not do that.
Didn't. He didn't. All right. So after our big issue 50, the spotlight book we're going to be talking about here in just a little bit, the year comes to an end with writer artist David Mack, along with his character Maya Lopez and Echo, returning for the first three books of the Echo storyline that we're going to actually save to talk about in its entirety when we talk about 2004. So that was basically the year for Daredevil. There was a lot going on yet again, and I I loved the stories. I think these were really great books. I thought they were really well, um, not just written, but they were presented really well on the page. The artistry, the coloring, everything about these books, I felt like again were really they really did a great job knocking these stories out of the park.
No, I would absolutely agree. And it's also weird because there is almost nothing about these which is in any way juvenile literature. Most of the stuff beforehand, there are enough camp elements and things like that, or just the way it's written, and the like. These stories are extremely well written. The dialogue is rich. There's all sorts of references and sort of banter back and forth between the characters. Everybody seems three-dimensional, and they all, even the small characters, kind of have their own little ticks and their own things about them. It really is like a movie that has been cast with these characters, and the art is fantastic in terms of just sort of delivering this moodiness. It feels an awful lot like watching, I mean, almost a Breaking Bad type of TV show, probably would be a good example. Something that has kind of that dangerous darkness moving through it, but is very, very believable
Yeah.
and street level. So these are unlike, the last year or so is unlike really any Daredevil we've seen before, and in many ways, any comics we've seen at Marvel before. Because even with the superhero stuff, even with the fighting, it remains more of a people slugging each other or weapons being used in more believable ways, rather than like, the Owl and Daredevil flying around through the streets off laptops, and Owl flying, and like, I don't believe Owl flew at all this entire time
No.
that we saw him.
No, I don't think so.
So he never really used any superpowers. The closest thing we get to a superpower really in most of these is Bullseye having his aim, and he
Yeah,
didn't do anything particularly crazy with that either. So
right.
yeah, it's a very, very ground level story.
All right. I think we've stalled long enough. I think it's time to jump into the spotlight, and we need to talk about how issue number 50 plays out. This week's spotlight story.
All right, Dwayne, bring it on. Number 50, October 2003, part 5 of the hardcore storyline. What was it that made this your story of the year?
I mean, this was going to be a huge battle between Kingpin and Daredevil. They're just the way this was set up going into it, there was just no way that we weren't going to see some fireworks when this came in. And so it being a issue 50, by the way, also I expected something big, because it seems like, the big round numbers tend to get nice extra things going on.
Yep.
And so on the introduction page, after the recap, we actually get a special thanks message. Special thanks to guest artists in order of appearance: Gene Colan and Dave Gutierrez, Lee Weeks and Tom Palmer, Klaus Janson, John Romita Sr., Al Mulgrim, Joe Quesada, Danny Miki, Mike Avon Oming, and David Mack. All of these artists contributed in issue 50, on top of the fact that we had, Alex Maleev doing most of this book.
Yep.
So I didn't
Very
know what to
cool.
think. I did not know what to think that they had all these artists that they were thanking as part of this.
Yep. That was pretty neat.
Yeah.
I'll,
So
I'll,
this
I'll also say that
okay.
the cover, and I don't know that it's confirmed, but when I look at the cover and it's a Maleev cover, it looks to me like he is sort of doing almost like a Gene Colan homage in it, because it looks like a Gene Colan Daredevil figure to me. Only it's obviously Maleev. It just, something about that says Gene Colan to me.
Yeah, so issue 50 on the cover, it's all red basically. There's a red background. It is Daredevil, Matt Murdock without the mask on, and he's kind of in a slouched seated position,
Yep.
like he's just gotten done in a battle basically. I would say.
Yep.
And there's there's just a lot of red, and there just seems, I don't know how to describe it, but it does look very, very lifelike, and also looks very like troubling, I guess, would maybe be
I
a
would,
word I would use to describe it.
what's interesting to me, and I think this is a little bit of a kind of an Easter egg for what's going to happen in the book, is he looks to me like a king sort of sitting back in his throne, looking
That's a
out over
good that is a good
over
description.
his, like throne room or something like that. Because he's
Yes.
he's in this what looks like a big chair with his arms kind of splayed out. He's got one hand on his billy club, and he's just sort of leaned back. He's obviously been in a scrape, but he basically looks like, yeah, he's just sitting there relaxing after the battle while someone's getting ready to bring him his, turkey leg or whatever it is that he gets now as the monarch. So,
Um,
but it's a fantastic cover. I don't
it
know if we've
is.
talked about the covers that much. They've all been fantastic.
Yes.
Maleev just knocks these out of the park.
Yeah, but I'm glad that you talked about that, so that we could talk in a little bit of detail about the cover as we're leading into the story. So this story opens with panels showing the Kingpin's finishing touches, i.e., murders and explosions, taking complete control over New York and the surrounding area. He asks his lieutenants if he has their attention and their focus going forward. One apparently felt like this was more of a rhetorical question than anything and starts suggesting how the situation could have been handled better last time, causing Kingpin to order for his wife to be killed. It's just then that a car plows through the wall and into the room, and a fight between Daredevil and Kingpin is on. Craziness. He's driving and he's blind, and he drives a vehicle through a wall into a building and into this like back room where Kingpin is meeting his lieutenants. It is okay. That might be a little over the top, but at the same time, awesome. So they start by exchanging pleasantries and then a few fists before we get several pages of guest artist panels showing Daredevil beating the absolute daylights out of the Kingpin. The Kingpin briefly grabs Daredevil around the neck and starts choking him, but Matt escapes by clapping his ears like the Hulk, and then continues to beat the Kingpin until his hands start to bleed. This was an unbelievable set of pages, Dan. These guest artists took turns paneling out this giant fight scene between the Daredevil and Kingpin. And as cool as you might think it looks in your head, it looked even better on the page. Different styles, different looks, same cool fight. It was amazing how great this turned out.
Yep. And I think it was interesting because the first one is Gene Colan, and you've definitely got that kind of a fluid sort of thing. He's got the old school like speed marks where you can see the fist going through and the like. And then Lee Weeks has got a panel, and Klaus Jansson's got a panel. Jansson signed his. I don't know if a lot of the other guys did, but as you go through them each, if you didn't look at it before, and I didn't, I got to about the Jansson panel before I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And then I'm like, oh, hold it. And now we've got, and it's cool they got John Romita to do his, because he's not a Daredevil guy. His son is. JR Jr. did a bunch of Daredevil. Yeah. But John Romita, I think, was the first person to pencil the Kingpin. So when you look at the Kingpin in the other guys' stuff, they've just got him wearing like regular pants. Romita's got him in the old pinstripes, like the old like dapper billionaire.
I didn't catch that,
because that's how we drew him for years. So he just sort of, I'm surprised he didn't put the white coat back on him for that panel. But it's interesting and cool just kind of seeing how each of them does their own thing. And then, at the end, you get Mack with his crazy different panel. I also think it's sad what you see by sort of subtraction is that Frank Miller's not one of these guys.
Oh,
and
not.
Miller really is not doing a whole lot right now at this point. He's kind of off in Hollywood and the like, and we more and more are finding out. There's a documentary out about it now, evidently, that I haven't been able to get access to yet. I'm really looking forward to, about Frank Miller and sort of his descent into alcoholism and things like this. But it seems like he was in a pretty bad place right now, and so part of that became that he just did really think that he was past the point of making comic books because he was a filmmaker and everything else, I suspect. But we would have been nice to have gotten a Frank Miller panel in there. So
yeah. I hadn't even considered the fact that he's not in there. But yeah, that is a tough loss, because I could only imagine what that panel would have looked like. That would have probably been just amazing stuff.
Yeah, would have been neat. they could get any of the other ones. But I mean, obviously, every panel that's there then takes away a little bit from the fact that we already have a fantastic artist on the book doing all the other stuff. So no complaints
Yeah.
about the panels Malieve did instead.
Right.
They were just fine. So
No, they were great.
mhm.
So this story ends with Daredevil running another car into another building, this time Josie's bar, where the Kingpin was intended to meet with his enforcers. Quote, "This is the Kingpin, your Kingpin, and I beat him with my bare hands," says Daredevil, before taking off the mask and saying, "I'm not protecting this city anymore. I am running it. And if you think I'm kidding, look at the carcass in front of you." And a full page panel of an unconscious, bruised, and beaten Fisk lies on the floor. An absolutely fantastic end to this story. I just could not believe, and he took off his mask when he said it too. That's the thing. All this talk about him not being Daredevil and all that just went completely out the window. That's how upset he is right now, and how much he means every punch that he threw at the Kingpin during this fight.
This is his I am Iron Man moment, essentially. He is Daredevil. And really this goes back to the fact that he and Fisk have kind of a similar understanding of how New York works.
Yeah.
Because Fisk was coming back, and even when he was talking to the cops, he's like, "Look, you guys just don't understand. You thought you wanted to get rid of me, but look at the morons who came in and messed up things after I left, right? The
Yeah.
city is built, it's a deeply cynical idea, but the idea is that New York and cities and societies depend on people who work outside of the laws to provide things people want that are illegal or to keep control over certain elements. And that because of that, Wilson Fisk was a necessary and productive part of the city. And at a certain point now, it sounds like Matt Murdock has decided that, look, I can't just get rid of the Daredevil or of the Kingpin. I have to replace the Kingpin with something new. And I guess that's me.
Yeah.
So, he's like, look, you're not going to do any stuff in my area that, like the drugs and all the other stuff. If I catch you with that, it's going to be bad. So he's
Yeah.
basically showing them the Kingpin and saying, this could be you if you get out of line.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that is our spotlight, and I have to tell you, we've talked about character-driven story. This story, hardcore, in this spotlight book was about action. This was primarily just those two fighting, and I loved it. The guest panels across this, seeing all those different styles, I loved the way this looked, and then just the way it ended with Matt Murdock taking on a new role, I think, or seeing himself in a new role in the city. I'm very curious to see what this means for the character going forward, because it feels like you have to make it, something has to change, because you can't keep doing the thing that you were doing if this is the way you kind of end this story, because it doesn't match up, because like he's talking about, yeah, you do anything you're not supposed to, I'm gonna find you, I'm gonna beat you up. So you should get out now if you don't plan on changing, is basically what he says. And I just, yeah, this to me,
Yep.
I think actually topped that surprise that his secret got out. I just could not believe we've had Kingpin fights before, but this felt different to me, and it felt like it was a bigger moment than I think almost any of the other Kingpin fights have had before now.
And you're thinking of this all as a totality. The fight, the multiple panels with the guest artists, him throwing the guy in front of people in the bar all at the end, as like one big, this is the thing.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if you were talking about the fight with the Kingpin or him doing the I'm now taking over New York. It sounds like you're lumping them together into he fights the Kingpin and then takes over.
It feels like it's all one big moment that sort of extends.
Okay. Yep. And the fact that the Kingpin also is so confident that he's going to take back his city, that essentially, a couple of issues ago, he's like, I got no money, I got no wife, I got no family, everybody hates me. And yet somehow now he's on the verge of getting it all back. And then Daredevil hits him with a car, right? So kind of crazy.
He hits a wall with a car and then hits the Kingpin with his fist many times. So Dan, did I leave anything out from issue 50? Is there anything else that we should talk about with regards to that? Because I'm spent just going through and talking about the recap, because I got the adrenaline that I got when I was reading the issue as I was recapping the issue. It was great.
I think the main thing again is that idea of it being cinematic, though. Especially even when you look at the first few panels, the first 2-3 pages are essentially widescreen film shots almost of like morning in Atlantic City with a guy tied on something floating into the harbor and a guy in Chinatown in the, with his feet coming out of a dumpster. But you can almost see it as a movie kind of rolling along, these initial scenes of a movie, much like, again, The Godfather. And I think you can't look at Brian Michael Bendis in these early ones and not realize that he is like a Scorsese junkie. And not only Scorsese, but obviously Coppola, because, The Godfather is a massive influence on this sort of thing. Those scenes where you see everybody being killed in The Godfather, it's got very much that sort of feel. And then you cut to these guys and him taking over. I think it's weird, actually, now that you mention it. I would have thought more had happened, but you're right. It's basically 2 pages of seeing bodies, and then the Kingpin's trying to take over, and then
it's literally like 4 pages, and then we have a fight, and the fight goes the entire rest of the book.
Mm-hmm. So, but really a fantastic 50th issue, and of course something that ends with a complete change of the status quo, in that now it looks like he's not trying to keep his identity secret. It looks like he's going to maybe go into hiding and proactively do stuff. It's going to, I don't know, tell the police that now he's the Kingpin and they need to stay out of his town. Who knows what he's going to do? And we don't find out for another 5 or 6 issues, because now somebody else comes in and takes over. Yeah. So, because Mack is going to take the next 5 issues before we get back to our story.
Yeah.
So, which, those will be next week, or a couple weeks from now. But what I do love about that is originally it sounds like he had been contacted about doing the Echo stories as a mini series, and so that Echo would get her own book. But then I suspect, just because of the fact Maleev does all of the art himself, even though he's using obviously a lot of almost like copy and paste, it's still a lot of work to do a full book yourself with the pencils and inks. So I think they just used it as a break to let him catch up. So Mack takes over for 5 issues now, and then Bendis and Maleev can come back without having to have other fill-in issues or stuff. And if you got to have a fill-in, got to tell you, we'll talk about it in a while. Having David Mack do a fully painted, gorgeous story like that is a pretty acceptable fill-in. So
yeah. No, and it also sort of kind of keeps you in suspense about what is going to happen next. It's like,
exactly.
You're just like, come on! It's like, get here already! I want to know what's going on. I would have.
This is the equivalent of
it would have killed me. Like the fact that I couldn't, Netflix to the next episode immediately and figure out what's going on.
Yep, this is the end of season cliffhanger. Is what it ends up being, because now you wait basically half a year before you find out what's going to happen. So,
right. All right, should we jump in and talk about the rapid fire questions?
Let's do it. So, first off, who's Murdock in love with this year?
We have a new love interest, Mila Donovan, the blind woman he saves from a truck, They go crashing through a window. She's like, "Hi," and then like certainly gets really infatuated with him and is like, I'm going to approach Matt Murdock because, he's supposed to be the Daredevil. And she, like, he tries to deny it. But she's like, yeah, I know you're denying it, but, you know, let's just be
Mhm.
friends. And he takes a liking to her actually pretty fast.
Oh, I love that her friend's like, well, since you're blind, if you hear his voice again, will you know? She's like, yes. It's like, really, seeing people can't do that, though? I mean, if his voice is that distinctive, it's why doesn't everybody know this? But in any case, I would say he's currently in the infatuated stage at best right now, though. They've only known each other, what, 2 days? But she is 100% the love interest. And
It's
spends the night at his place for the first time and just about gets killed by Bullseye. So we'll see how long she sticks around.
yeah, that feels like that would be um that might be
No,
a deal breaker, but you never know.
you would think, who's the biggest villain of the year?
I mean, Kingpin, probably, as it is most years. He's only
Mhm.
around for half the year, but he,
Yep,
he makes up for it in the time he is there.
only around for half the year, and for most of it, he is completely without portfolio. While the Owl has like a year and a half to build himself up, and we don't even consider him because the
Yeah.
Kingpin, just wandering the shadows, is more powerful than the Owl with all of New York's like mobs behind him. So,
Right.
did we see Matt practicing law this year?
We did see Matt lose the case defending Hector Ayala and the tragic consequences that occurred as a result of that. Um,
Is this his worst performance as a lawyer that we've seen so far? I think it is.
Probably, yeah. I
I
don't
don't
know
think
if
he.
he's maybe lost. I don't. He's lost one or two cases, but one of those cases he kind of wanted to lose anyway, so he lost
Yeah,
sort of intentionally. But yeah, I think this is one where this is the first time he's been like, this person is innocent. I'm going to get you acquitted. And then that didn't happen.
probably lost intentionally because it helped Daredevil somehow. Yet another reason he should be disbarred from practicing in the state of North Dakota or in the state of New York, probably. So let's see here. Anyone new know Matt's identity?
I mean, the secret's out, so
No.
it's really hard for anybody new. I mean, I guess Mila Donovan, maybe you could say that she,
She knows more. Like she's actually sure, but I think everybody
yes.
else is pretty sure. Nobody seems to be buying his lies about it. Is Daredevil still a good guy this year?
I mean, to your point, he doesn't kill Bullseye. He doesn't actually kill the Kingpin either, despite how angry he is in the latter half of the hardcore storyline. So I'm thinking he is, but yeah, he was really close to a line there.
So so does getting angry and deciding to only carve a sigil into someone's forehead instead of killing them make you a good guy? Is that the point we're at right
It's
now in
no
Daredevil?
the I, I feel
I'll let you
like
buy on
while
that one.
I feel like while you are pointing out basically exactly what I just said, I dislike the way that it that got portrayed.
My framing did not satisfy. The other thing that I would note is that he has a number of people, including Luke Cage, who are also angry at him for the fact that he is lying about all of this and putting so many other people he knows in danger of compromising themselves trying to protect his secret. And Luke's sort of like, look, I do this thing without a mask, and maybe you could too, but you can't just keep lying to everybody. Daredevil's like, watch me. So
The
um
smug lawyer in him says, "Nah, I don't think I have to do that."
yep, yep, he really is. How about the Daredevil outfit? Anything changed this year?
And he didn't actually spend a ton of time in the outfit this year. And when he did, it looked pretty similar to the way it always has in
Didn't he
recent
used to have a
years.
didn't he used to have a mask, like something he wore over his head as well to hide his identity? Because I don't remember seeing that there at the end.
No, I guess by the time issue 50 rolls around, he's decided he doesn't need a mask.
That's a little different. How about Matt's past? We learn anything new?
I did nothing stands out to me as anything new about his
I don't
past
believe
this year.
I don't believe so either. Nothing. No more backstory. How about the biggest moment of the year?
So obviously the big fight, both with Bullseye and then the Kingpin, and then that whole like the entire hardcore storyline, I think could potentially be the big moment of the year. I also would say I didn't not necessarily part of the big fights, but Mary setting Matt on fire and it basically as the ending of two books, like you talked about,
Mhm.
was a pretty big moment as well.
A lot of people had liked that character, and she'd been gone for a number of years, where they just kind of had shuffled her off as cured. And another one of those great moments for Murdock, where he beds a woman so he can betray her to the authorities and get her taken off to have some sort of psychic blocks put in. So, yay, Matt. But so yeah, there were so many big moments this year. It was it was a lot of fun, and I think just one of the most satisfying years of Daredevil that I've read in a long time.
Yeah, it was really good.
I'm now remembering how lucky I was to be coming back into comics in the early 2000s when these were going on. So, very cool.
When I was saying that I wanted to start reading some Daredevil comics, I had no idea this is the kind of thing I was going to be getting into. And now I'm even happier that we're doing this.
Mhm. Yep, you made it through the early 70s, so you deserve this. You you have, you have paid your dues, Dwayne. You deserve some good comics.
So I think we've taken care of the year for Daredevil this year. It was a big year. I think there's one thing left we have to do before we can wrap up 2003. That is talking about the takeaway for the year. Dan, let's talk about the takeaway. This week's takeaway. All right, Dan, we've got a lot to think about when we think about 2003. There's a lot of big movies. The comic book industry did pretty well this year. Solid year, great year for Daredevil. Big moment and probably a change for the future when it comes to Matt Murdock and how he and the it is in the city that he's in Hell's Kitchen. We're thinking about a takeaway for this year. What what should we remember when we think about 2003?
So I'm having a tough time putting this into the words I really want. So stick with me in terms of how this comes out in framed. But I think what it really seems to me this year started to bring home is that we're leaving behind one era of sort of comic book violence and moving into a different area of comic book violence or era
Okay.
of comic book violence. The sort of grimdark 90s were that time where you had these over the top, really excessive sort of sex and violence, just extravaganzas, right? Where the Punisher would kill 400 people, or you would have just this crazy blood splattered tableau in a story or something. But it was all done, and I don't know how to word this properly other than to say with a certain level of innocence, to the point where the Punisher was always sort of doing it for the right reasons. He was a good guy, even though he was killing people. And even though Spider-Man would be like, man, you can't do that. I got to take you in. He would work with him the next week. And really, there was never a good examination of just how this all worked. The the whole thing was sort of just played for action and laughs. And I think what you start seeing in the post 2001 world is a higher level of real cynicism about motives and not just action, and a a moral ambiguity that starts to seep into comics at a very root level. So just this year in 2003, Marvel brought out Supreme Power, which darkens the motives and sort of the story of the Squadron Supreme. You get things like DC's Red Sun, which shows us a darker side to, what could have happened with Superman, that essentially there's nothing about Kal-El that meant he was going to necessarily be the good guy, right? It's a matter of he landed in the right cornfield. And same thing with Image's Invincible, which is, if you've watched the animateds, even if you haven't read the show, there's a very dark side to that story, where essentially it's the story of, a planned alien invasion and this subterfuge, and essentially of a good guy who's really about the worst guy that you can imagine, right? and and Daredevil comes into this as well, and I think that's what reminded me that after all these years of fighting the Kingpin, of being good versus evil, in this issue, Daredevil in issue number 50 during this year, Daredevil finally decides that in order to do good, he has to essentially usurp sort of the structures and the behaviors of the evil that he's been facing. And so Daredevil is now, going to essentially become a Kingpin. And more as we move into the 2000s, you get these characters who, they can't really be called a good guy, they can't really be called a bad guy. More and more you start seeing Doctor Doom working with the Fantastic Four, or certain, like the Dark Avengers we're going to get coming up. Heroes become villains, villains become heroes. Nobody can really be trusted. And it's a very, very uncertain kind of world. And because of that, I think there's a lot of really great storytelling in the 2000s. But it also is very cynical. Authority figures are generally not to be trusted, like the Runaways. These kids think they have great parents. Their parents turn out to be supervillains trying to sell off the planet to a bunch of super evil aliens. It's kind of a different time, but we go away from that sort of bombastic kind of violence and good and evil of the 80s, or even there's moral ambiguity to some of those characters, but they don't think about it. And we're going to think about it and really reflect on it more in the 2000s. So, yeah.
That's really interesting. I'm kind of starting to see what you're saying here when I'm thinking about some of the things that we've read in that over the last few years. There definitely is sort of a tone change, and
I think,
yeah,
and it's a history thing. America in the 2000s became a very different place than America in the 90s. There is that. I mean, I think people talk about it almost as a loss of innocence in many ways with the way that we looked at things. And you see it very heavily in our media. And again, comic books are mostly based out of New York. And New York was one of the places that psychologically had the toughest time overcoming that, because it was quite literally ground zero for it. And so there are just a lot of repercussions and overtones out of that we're going to be seeing. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really interesting takeaway for 2003. It'll be interesting to see how long this lasts and what the next few years look like as a result, if this takes hold and really starts being a thing, or if it's
Yep.
or how long it ends up being that way. It's really interesting.
Yeah. And if any of you out there in the listening audience think I'm completely off base on this, and that the Punisher was always like this, and it's not really a change, let me know. I'm always willing to discuss alternative options.
Right. With that, I think we're going to wrap things up for this week. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That'll help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Maybe you read issue 50 or any of the Brian Michael Bendis books that we've been discussing over the last couple of years. We'd love to get your thoughts on those. You can send us them via email. That address is comments@comicsovertime.com. Or if they're shorter, you can send us them via social media on Blue Sky. We are at Comics Overtime there. Dan, this was a great discussion. I loved learning about the bigger comic book industry this year. I loved talking with you about what we saw in Daredevil this year, and we get to do 2004 next week.
Yep. Oh man, I love David Mack stuff. Cannot wait to get a chance to visit with you about that. It's was just amazing comic book art and story. So yeah, been a good time. Though.
Right.
Looking forward to getting to the next one.
Yeah, sounds good. Until next week, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.